So, welcome to the Media Services Worldwide podcast. Today, we've got amazing guests from Activaire. Now, music affects people in profound ways, and this company has found a way to do so with architecture and science behind their methodology. It's with our extreme pleasure that we'd love to welcome CEO and co-founder Adeshdio Saran and President and co-founder Lara Wiesenthal to the podcast. So thank you guys so much for being a part of this. Really appreciate you guys taking the time.
Hey, Trevor, how's it going?
Can't complain.
Thanks for having us. We're so excited to talk with you today.
Thank you. No, and we are too, because as our listeners know, we typically have some conversations with our guests before this, and we know Activaire, and when we started really diving deep into their story, we knew that this had to get out to the public. And being a company that specializes in providing curation-led, subscription-based music services to different companies and brands, I think that sounds almost simple to some people, right? But there's a complexity. There's a real process and methodology behind what you do. And I think it's great to kind of dive into understanding how you got there. So if we start from the beginning, right? Founded in Brooklyn, 1999, Adesh and Lara met at the Pratt Institute School of Architecture, but then decided to get into music. So how did that happen? How do you go from, architects, into the music side of the coin?
So in the late 90s, MP3s started happening, and Adesh and I have always listened to music, and architects listen to music quite a bit, because when you're in studio and working for so many hours, music is a really, vibrant part of architecture and the culture of the studio. So and Adesh and I were always really into music, and we bonded over music and our tastes in music. And we've both been collecting music in all formats. And, Adesh had already had a really good vinyl collection when I met him. And so when the MP3 came around, we were really fascinated with this new format. And with everything that was happening with the digitization of architecture and just the way things were happening with digital culture in general, we were really interested in how we could use this new medium as a design element. There is a book called City of Bits by William Mitchell, which I found really fascinating. It was talking about how digital culture is going to change cities, and it seemed really futuristic, but really engaging at the time. So in school, I was thinking a lot about how to harness and kind of ride the wave of the ephemeral side of city planning and where architecture is going to be heading. So I don't know, it all kind of knit together because background music is, well-established chromatic service. It's an essential service for business. But there's this really exciting new aspect to it with what was happening with music. And so it was just really knitting together our passion and our expertise.
For me, before we started recording, we were talking about old school computers. Now, for me, I'm actually the story starts with me with being a left-handed person. A left-handed architect back in the 90s meant you had to draw very carefully, otherwise you would smudge your entire drawing. I was notorious for having pretty dirty drawings because I liked using ink, and I also was left-handed. So when AutoCAD became available, when we were in Pratt, I just jumped at the chance to learn how to create architecture digitally. We were using 386 DX computers back then. We were using AutoCAD. We were using 3D Studio Max. We were on DOS. It was incredible. We were just super excited every day to go into school and figure out how to use these tools to not only create the architecture we were creating with pen and pencil, but to create new forms of architecture, because now we can do things we couldn't do before. The sort of virtual aspect of architecture opened up these doors to forms and spaces that we couldn't create before. And I think if you look at the architecture of today, you start to see forms that are possible only because of computers. There are forms you can make that you cannot possibly draw. So that sort of venture into the impossible was really exciting for me. At the same time, being a huge music nerd, the internet was cracking wide open, and it wasn't Google at the time. I think it was Alta Vista is what we used. I was Alta Vista-ing every record I had to find out more about, basically liner notes, producers, musicians, what else they played on, who else is listening to this stuff. So I went from having like a small group of friends who liked the same music to now being part of online communities where people love the same music, people from all over the world. You end up staying up super late at night talking to someone, across the globe about a record that you love together. So that was very, very groundbreaking. I felt like I was living in the future, and I wanted to take those things and create something with it. It still felt like architecture. It still felt like we were building. We were still using, everything we learned in school to create the business, to create the software, to compose or sequence things. All of it still applies. The way you frame something with music, the way you place music in space, sort of the spatial composition of things, all still applies. Curation is about how you put things next to each other to tell a story. Architecture is very much the same.
It absolutely does, and I think the points that I'm hearing, right, and I think that our guests are definitely listening to right now is this was not recent, right? This came, your architecture, your background in architecture was driven and pushed forward by the use of technology, right, for both of you. And we're talking about the 386, DX, right? We're talking about computers that and we talked about this in the beginning part of the conversation. You had to hit a turbo button to overclock it, and going to 486s and Pentiums, and we were really, really dialed into our modem speeds at 14.4 and 28.8, and the world was opening up for all of us, right? But you guys saw this music world becoming more accessible, but by gaining access, you saw that there was a need to curate it, right? Now, when you said it's how curation is how you get things to tell a story, placing things in a manner that they tell a story, right? I don't think I'm quoting you exactly, but you said something just like that. And one of the things that we know about Activaire and that you guys have explained to us, that you do this expertly, authentically, cleverly, and fearlessly. So how do you go from this new emerging technology to being able to make such a claim and doing what you guys do so well today? How did that evolve?
Well, really, basically, everything we do still centers on the idea of bringing amazing music to the foreground. So if we're working on a piece of software, or we're working on a contract, or we're speaking to clients, that's our goal. It's always going to be our goal. We're really not doing it for much else. The idea of bringing this music and also placing that music in a place where it's in a context where it can be appreciated is super important for us. Getting it to the right audience, getting it to sit well and really thrive is really our goal. We've always been collecting music. We've been making mixtapes for our entire lives. And it really, when you think about making a mixtape and how careful you were back in the days with your tapes, we're still doing that, but on a much larger scale. But we're very carefully organizing music to convey a message and to support itself as well, to really let that message that it has in itself be communicated crystal clearly in a way that other people can appreciate it and fall in love with it just like we do.
Yeah, when we were in school, one of the things you can do in New York City, especially in being an architect, is that you can work while you're in school. So Desh and I, like as soon as we could work, we worked. So we were in school. We're working really hard in school, and we're working, and we're getting experience. And so we worked the whole way through. And what happened, in the 90s with the shift with technology is that we started working on more projects. So as Adesh was saying, we started using digital tools, and we started building websites, and we started, using as many mediums. So for us, it was like a natural transition to start using music as a design element. When we first started, we didn't really think about, like, branding wasn't really a hot term back then. We were thinking more in terms of space and design, and with the kind of the evolution that was happening with web design, and how design really became more prolific and things started taking off, and interior design in New York City started looking really different and amazing and colorful and interesting and engaging, and what was happening online with music and music culture and communities, we wanted to bring those two things together. So that was kind of like the starting point. As we started to get into it, and as we started to develop our practice and talking to clients, we realized how important that brand experience is, and that really this was about what the soundtrack is doing for the brand experience in the space. And that's when we started really understanding and diving into the art and science of music. So, so through the practice of, being experts at, what's happening in music culture, what is this going to do in the space? Authentically, like, we really love music. We talk to musicians. We've been listening to music for so long. We're really, fully engaged in the whole cultural trajectory of music. Cleverly, there's some things you can do, and you have to be a little bit smart, and that so cleverly and fearlessly are really tied together. And it's really important for brands to have that kind of free range. So that's why we say, it's fearlessly and cleverly. It's important for brands to kind of have that edge and that engaging aspect. So those are kind of the driving values that we always think of for across our whole team for every project that we're working on.
Yeah, I mean, I think fearlessly is incredibly important, because it's the way, and we don't mean recklessly. What we're talking about is the way you stand out in a crowd. Is you're not afraid to really be yourself. And brands all have a personality. Really interesting personalities, and those personalities are built by the founders and the people who work there. And it's important to communicate those values fearlessly, and not be worried about, well, what is this other brand doing, and how do we kind of stay with the herd? But it's really about standing out and getting your message across in a really crowded marketplace. So we talk about fearlessly as a way to really make you pop, and I think every brand, big brands, small brands, mom and pops, all have really interesting stories. And there's something fascinating about every brand. There's something fascinating about every person you meet. And we want to tell that story. There's definitely something fascinating about every song you hear. And when you pair the personality of a song with the personality of a brand or a person, you get an amazing effect.
Right now, let's move to the current just for a moment. What's the reach of Activaire now?
So we are providing service in 43 countries. We have our own software platform, which we've developed and maintain. And our service team is based in Austin. Our creative team is mostly based in Brooklyn, where we founded. And most of the companies that we provide service for are mostly US-based companies. So the projects usually start with a sensibility of what the US market needs, what that retail and what that hospitality or co-working experience is about. And then we look at each region and determine if we need to incorporate some regional influence.
If I could add to what Lara was saying, one of the most interesting things about what we do when we deal with regionalization is the problem. And when I say problem, I don't mean that in a bad way. We love these types of problems. This is the architect speaking. Is trying to figure out, how do we continue this lexicon that we develop with the initial curation and include regional accents that also speak that same language. And this actually, to be very basic, can boil down to actually changes in language itself. How do you go from a Western based music program to then incorporate maybe a Latin layer or some other language, Spanish or French, or how do you take that and maintain that across different languages, across different countries, across just different populations? It's super interesting for us to do that and really figure out how do we maintain the sense of brand while also appealing and speaking to the people in the region. It's one of our favorite things to do.
Yeah, and that's something that can't be done without, true passion, true expertise, and a real science behind, your methodology, your process. And this is where I really want to go to a couple of quotes. So, Adesh, this one is for you. So this is, one of your quotes, and I'd love for you to speak on this and just expound on it more. Your quote is, "Our music curation is driven by our insatiable appetite for knowledge of music and cultural trends. Not satisfied with just being cool, we filter every playlist through the lens of music psychology, customer metrics, and marketing data."
I think the centerpiece to that statement is really about not just being cool. It's really important in what we do to not get caught up in the trendiness or the cool factor of things, and really understand the music as something that's appropriate to the project, appropriate to the listener, appropriate to the brand. And I think a lot of times people get kind of lost in trying to just be cool. Also maybe trying to appeal to Instagram likes or streaming numbers or things like that. And I think when you go down that path and you don't look at things like music psychology or customer metrics or marketing data, you get a pretty empty playlist or empty program. And for us, it's really about, does this fit? And there's always a layer of, I like to call it kind of Activaire-ness about what we do. So it always starts with a base of something that we think is cool. And it doesn't matter what genre that is or what time period that's from. If we fall in love with something, it's because we really think it's cool in some way or other. So we always start with that layer anyway, but then we also take that and try to build around it to really get something that sits firmly in the brand that we're working with or whatever it is we're doing. If we're making that mixtape or a DJ mix or all of those things, anything that involves music, if we're talking about music for films or commercials, it has to make sense and it has to have some foundation of reality to it. I hope that makes sense.
It does. It does, because what I'm hearing is that if the music matters, right? The music is not, the choice of music matters. The ability when somebody has an art collection and they're looking for a particular piece to either go in office, to go in a particular venue or their home in their personal collection, they can't just look at a piece as an individual, right? They have to look at how that fits into the space, how it enhances, how it builds on an experience. And, this is new to me. What you're doing, what you're saying is new to me. And I feel that you're making that something that resonates with, the average listener like myself, the person who's driven by the experience, not the curator of the experience. I think that resonates so much. And I want to now direct this to Lara, to your quote, because I think they're so complementary, these two quotes, and I think so profound. Your quote, Lara, was, "Music communicates your brand's unique qualities, cultural relevance, and purpose, which are all of the reasons why customers feel an affinity for your brand." That is really, directed, to the brand owners, right?
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. The role of a brand and the value and great things about brands is the story and the cultural and the kind of the purpose and relevance behind them, right? So you can get jeans, lots of different denim brands, but why do you like, one denim brand or veer towards another. It's not just because of the way it fits or feels. It's because there's some story, there's some culture there. Same thing with sneakers, for example. Like, you know, you can say that they're all kind of, you know, very similar and they do things that stand out, but there's culture that there's a relevance there that you're drawn to. This is why people veer towards brands and they choose different brands, is because of the emotional response and the feeling. So music communicates all of those reasons why we're drawn to a brand. So there are different ways that brands can reinforce and tell that story and build that culture. But music is one of the most powerful ways to leverage all of those things very quickly. So it's a really powerful tool for brands to use. So if you're just using image, or you're just using marketing, or you're just using sponsorship and activations, all of those do tell the story. Music cuts right through everything and instantly communicates what your brand value is about in nanoseconds. So it's, you know, we're creating playlists and we're talking to brands. We're taking all of those aspects of the brand story into consideration and using music to leverage all of those aspects.
I think a lot of this relates back to growing up in a culture where, as a teenager, the most important thing for us was what band t-shirt are you wearing, because that was how we communicated our culture and our association with a specific tribe to the people around us. So, you know, when I was 14, you know, wearing a Depeche Mode t-shirt was the most important thing on earth for me, because that told everyone else that that's what I was into. Those are the people I want to hang out with. This is what I want to talk about all day long. This is what I'm scrawling in my notebook all day. This is what I'm about. And you could very quickly determine if you want to hang out with someone or not based on, you know, what they wrote on the top of their binder or what t-shirt they had on for what band, even before you heard the music. But it was music centered, right? So we were able to define our role or our place in a tribe by telling people what kind of music we listen to. And we still do that. You know, our music definitely defines us. When you're rolling down the interstate blasting music out of your car, you're telling the world, like, this is who I am, without using words. When the music's bleeding out of your headphones on the subway, and everyone can hear it in the car, you're communicating to everyone who you are. And it's such a powerful tool that we use to communicate to the world who we are. I'm always fascinated by that. I love hearing music bleeding out of people's lives and kind of putting together their story.
And for connecting and finding and connecting with people also, right? So as things become more digital, music taste is such a powerful attractor.
And you're absolutely right. I mean, as things become more digital, it becomes more accessible. But then I think what it does is it creates, you know, what do I choose? It's like having the world's largest menu at an amazing restaurant, right? But what do I put? What pairs? What goes? I'm going to name a brand, and I want you to tell me the music or artist that you associate with that brand. So the brand is Adidas, huh? Huh?
I mean, come on, Trevor. That's an easy one.
All right.
So I almost feel like I should mess it up.
Well, Adidas class is going to be Run DMC, but you know, I would say Kanye West.
Okay. All right.
Well, that's true. But also, Adidas in England is a huge brand with, you know, way back into the rave days, Adidas was a huge brand with ravers. It still is a huge brand with the ravers. It's a huge brand with the Manchester scene. Bands like the Stone Roses, you know, they love Adidas. They pronounce it Adidas.
Adidas, yep.
You know, so it has a couple of different lives. Outside of, you know, in America, we always definitely go to Run DMC, but you know, elsewhere, it definitly.
Oh yeah, the Stone Roses. Yeah. And all that association.
It's a music brand for sure, and in different places it means different things. But it has a lot of really great associations with music. It's a great brand.
Yeah, and I love exactly where you went. The response was, "Come on, Trevor, come on." We know it's Run DMC. Okay, they literally had a song. Okay, I mean, you're really going to challenge us? That was probably the dumbest question. But then, right? Then we go to the Stone Roses, right? We take it out to another country. We go out to another group, another demographic that maybe the U.S. wasn't familiar with. Then we looked at Kanye for some, you know, more, you know, current relevance. Then we go ahead and take it to. I remember back it was like 2009, 2010. I remember my son was born, and I was really out of Adidas. I really wasn't really thinking about the brand. And then all of a sudden, Madcon dropped "Begging You," and they did that huge promotional commercial with Pharrell, Missy Elliott, Dwight Howard, and I was like, wow. I didn't even think about this brand really until I just saw it. They pretty much just loaded a commercial with stars and music, and that drove this. It was everybody was at a house party and skating in the empty pool, and it just crossed genres, and that's the power, and that's the power that I truly believe and Activaire brings to the table. It's about crafting an experience in those stores. So when you talk about it,
it's really interesting that you brought that up, because I'm not going to name names, but I do think that there are brands who associate with music and do a great job of building their brand around music. And if you follow their history and you see where they maybe took a break from investing in music, you can see a pretty obvious decline in their relevance in culture. And if you see where they pick it back up, almost immediately they become relevant again.
Yeah, and brands that are really being proactive about music and are driving their association with music first are leading. So music is really sticky, right? So when you hear something, you remember where you heard it and what the context was. So music really quickly absorbs cultural context, right? So brands, if they're leading with that music and being the first, kind of the first interface for bringing music to the public, they're associating themselves with that genre and with that music first. So it's really important for brands to be proactive, not looking back, because you want to, be the context for that whole culture, not trying to like chasing the tail, where the music's been already.
I think one of the mistakes people make is investing a huge amount of money in something that's really, really popular. When things are really popular, that means they're associated with a lot of different things. And if you look back,
been there, done that.
Yeah, I mean, if you look back at brand sponsorships for certain artists, we're not naming names here, but the big ones are associated with multiple brands, sometimes even very similar products at the same time. I don't think that that's a really good move. I understand why people do it, but I think you're going to get a lot more impact if you try to really come up with your own voice. And not rely so heavily on, how many Instagram followers does this person have, and how can I get a piggyback on that? I think it's more about how relevant are you, how unique is your voice, how authentic does it sound? That's really going to be the thing, especially now where customers are really looking for experience more so than they were in the past. How unique is your experience, and how much can they say, I walked away from that experience with something I can share, something that feels unique to me. And that's really not going to happen when you're kind of piggybacking on massive fame all the time.
It's a really good point, because that's what I think I would think. I think a lot of people would think, hey, what's hot right now, what's trending right now, that's what I want to do. But at the same time, it's not giving me anything. It's not giving me a unique voice, to use your words. I'm not creating my own voice. I'm just repeating somebody else's. So it's my brand isn't standing out at that point.
Basically, if you're in a category, you're selling to the same audience. So it's really important to have a signature experience. So in the marketing and the brand experience, it's really important to look at specifically what makes a brand unique, and then using music to express that, and really trusting the instinct and the story and the culture and the direction of the brand. You can't really go wrong with that, because if you're working with artists that stay just in a tastemaker's circle, that's beautiful and that's wonderful. And some of those artists are going to be huge, and some of them are going to be small. But if it feels authentic to the brand, you'll have a signature and engaging and magnetic experience.
If you go into a fine restaurant and you get an amazing meal and you're looking for a wine to pair, who do you go to? If you may love and appreciate wines, but you would go to the sommelier, somebody who's going to guide you through their selection. What's going to best enhance your dish? So why wouldn't you do that for a brand which is longer lasting than a meal, which has much more of an investment than a meal, which is not temporary, but needs to create an immediate sense of connection and craft a memory and resonate. So having, you guys as this, sommelier of music is tremendous. So if you don't mind, can you speak to the brands, right? Like, talk to them right now about the future. We started touching on it, but music engagement is it's not a joke. It's not a gimmick. It's real, and brands need to learn how to use this, across multiple channels. They really need to know how to enhance their story as we move in. And I'll just kind of create some context, for anyone who listens to this, 6 months or a year from now, the world's current situation, as businesses start to, reopen and doors start to reopen. What's really going to drive a lot of the engagement is the experience that's curated. And not just being singular, but across, again, multiple channels. So what are your thoughts? What is Activaire's role, and how can these brands use music to grow across these channels?
It's so interesting, right? Because as things become more ephemeral and more digital, the brand experience, has to kind of resonate and feel consistent across all the channels. So music is this contactless element that really makes you feel something. So there is a feeling, and there's almost a feeling of connectivity and community. So music is this really amazing medium that everybody should really be diving into and using. You can use it on everything. So, we have really focused and become experts in music and physical space, and physical space will continue to open up, and those moments in the space will be even more precious and more valuable. Every millisecond of someone being in your space has to be maximized, right? But then across all of the other channels. So what are people seeing on your social media? What are they experiencing in commercials? Like when they're watching YouTube or they're watching TV shows, every time your brand has presence, there's an auditory side of that. Listenership has been steadily growing, and it's just recently spiked. And I think that's going to continue to grow even as we return to normal. So yeah, it's about tying in across all of the channels, and music is a really profound and also simple way to do that.
I think if we're talking about the near future, we have to understand what's happening to people now with music and their relationship with music, and be prepared to curate accordingly. People are home right now, relying on entertainment to keep their minds off of these events. And what we're seeing is, according to Nielsen, is people are looking at back catalog stuff. They're looking at the past to kind of use nostalgia to get them to feel some sense of normalcy. And I think we need to look a little deeper into what does that really mean. And I think it's really easy to understand that what people are doing right now is they actually have a moment to listen. Deep listening is a thing that maybe for the past 5 years people really haven't had the time to do. Only people who buy records or people who really sit there and download one album at a time and listen to it are really getting a deep listening experience. But right now, I think a lot more people are engaging in deep listening and maybe revisiting things they didn't get a chance to look at before. Maybe they're also they're being exposed to a lot of music that they're curious about, and they have the time to actually investigate. This being the Gen X year, maybe decade, for when we start showcasing all the music from our teenage years. Just like when I was a teenager, Jimi Hendrix and the Doors were really big. Box sets were coming out. We were taking a look at that and trying to understand, what is this music about? How can we use it? I think at the same time now, people are looking at box sets from bands or people revisiting Nirvana. I don't know if you saw the Post Malone Nirvana tribute, but that was incredible. I'm sure a lot of people who maybe and it's hard to imagine, but weren't that familiar with Nirvana, went and took a listen to what Nirvana was like.
And a lot of people who weren't that interested in Post Malone suddenly got interested, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So there's a lot of people taking time to actually listen to music. And that's going to mean a lot for not only how we use music, but also for people creating music. What does that mean? Maybe the album makes a comeback. Maybe the idea of just listening to transient singles is not that interesting to people anymore. And maybe people start having a deeper connection to music. So really getting ready for what that means and delivering on that. Are we going to come back and just go full-blown nostalgia? I don't think so. But I think that the listener is going to be a bit more demanding now on that experience, and is definitely going to want more of an experience in terms of what they're hearing and where they go and what they're discovering. Discovery is still going to be a huge thing. Opening up a streaming service or going online, it's hard. It's hard for the average person. It's hard for anyone really to discover new music. There's so much out there. There's so many voices telling you what to listen to, but it's still difficult. There's so much in front of you. It's not like back in the days when you go to a record store and your favorite record store clerk would hand you 5 records and you loved every one of them. It's a bit of a different time, and we kind of like to be that record store clerk still for everyone.
Love that. Be the record store clerk for everyone. I love it. Talk to me about that, because for those who haven't, who just are so stuck in the digital age, right? Why was the record store clerk, the man or the woman? Why were they the key person when you walked in? What was, just because you make that statement? Let's just bring some context to it. Why the record store clerk?
Well, because they're really listening to everything that's coming through the store, right? So the record store clerk is fully immersed in everything that's coming in. They understand the past, and they kind of have that insight. They've listened to the record before you have, right? So it's like they're like a little time traveler already. It's like they're already there before you've gotten there. And they also, if when you have a relationship with a record store and you go in frequently, they know you, they know your tastes, and they're excited to see you because they also want to share something that they're excited about with you. So there's this really wonderful personal connection. In a digital age, we have access to everything, and that's overwhelming. So, even if you might hear the same thing that someone else does, it's, do you have an emotional connection to it? Did you take time to listen and really dive in? So, it's not just me and Adesh, it's our whole team. So across our whole team, we know what the kind of, gist and what the direction is of different albums and different artists. So it's really exciting for us to bring that experience to our projects.
I would say that going to a record store where the person working there knew you and knew what you were into was probably just the best thing about going to record stores. When they would hand you something, and I think that what I learned from record store clerks, I'm going to shout out Beans at Other Music. Also shout out Zach at Throb. Those guys really would hand me things that I wouldn't necessarily pick for myself. And they would say, "Oh, you've got to listen to this." And they changed the course of my collection. They changed my taste. And, they knew I would like it, but they also knew I probably wouldn't have picked it out myself. And I could definitely say there are huge chunks in my record collection that are there because of those guys. And also, our good friend Miggy, we'd go to his shop and he would just hand us records. He was like, "Oh, you have a mild interest in dub? Here's a massive interest in dub. Here's a whole bunch of records you can listen to." And that thing where someone kind of sees that you might be poking around and that you have an interest and they're super interested and they share their knowledge with you, you really can't beat that. So if I could do that, on a daily basis, which is what I hope I'm doing, it's a dream job.
Phenomenal. Great. Best explanation of what the relevance of a record store clerk. I think that's probably been repeated in the last decade, because they really help craft a person's listening experience. And you're right. They were the experts. But when they had a knowledge of what their customers' likes and interests were, their suggestions had a relevance, right? They had a place. So you would take it. And then that would change your experience going forward. That would change your interests, likes, and your perception. And then that would it had a profound effect because it was a perpetual effect, actually, because then that would change how you would affect those that then you brought it to or you introduced to it. So, it's such a driving force, and I love that. So, what's a song you go to when you just need to zone out? Let's just go there. What are you putting on when you just need to not listen to anybody else?
You really want this answer?
You know what? Look, let's go. And I'll answer it too.
Of course, I'm completely curious about your answers to this, but I definitely have an answer for that. It's a record I go back to. It's a couple of records, actually, that I go back to constantly. I don't know if you're familiar with the band Talk Talk, but in the, I believe, late 80s, early 90s, they put out two records. One, The Spirit of Eden, and the last record, Laughing Stock, which people say are like the blueprint for post-rock, definitely laid a lot of groundwork for where Radiohead went, lots of other people. Once you look up those two, you'll see like basically any rock musician out there quotes these records. I didn't know that at the time when I got into them. They're really interesting. Talk Talk started out as a synth pop band, and then took a detour into a much more organic sound. The lead singer, Mark Hollis, who actually was probably the lead musician on the whole thing, kind of orchestrated a lot. Everyone else was Class A musicians on these records, but was really into Miles Davis's In a Silent Way. And I've been listening to that a lot lately, actually, because I only read that recently, and I hear the sort of use of space in that record and how Talk Talk used space in their record. But what they did was they recorded 25, 30 musicians kind of improvising over some basic themes that Mark came up with. And then in a very Beatles way, their engineer, Phil Brown, reassembled these recordings into these songs. And for me, they're just fascinating. I can't remember them note for note. It's always kind of a mystery when I put them on. I'm like, wow, I didn't see that coming. Even though I've listened to it millions of times, it always seems new. And I can really get swept away into it. So yeah, those two records, I quote those all the time, but those two records are absolutely amazing, and they're always new. And just be careful with them. They can be, for some people, a little depressing and far out, but they're, for me, incredible.
Love it. Lara?
That's a really hard one to follow. So the album that if I have to just put something on and let it play, and it's from one artist, it's going to be Sandinista by The Clash, because I feel like that's their most advanced, layered album, and there's so many different sounds, and it's like there's just so much space in that. But there's also the intensity that they have from their earlier albums. I think it's their best album, and it's something that I can just kind of keep going back to over and over again. I mean, I always kind of revisit my hardcore playlists, and like my favorite Beastie Boys album is Check Your Head, for sure, because there was this moment where they dove back into hardcore, and I love that moment where they're playing their musicians, they're playing their instruments again, a little bit. They're not, you can hear that they're mastering, and they're just kind of like turning the corner on musicianship. And I love that. You can hear that journey. Kate Bush is a favorite. I can just listen to her endlessly. Sandinista is definitely a good one. That's like where they become like musicians, which is hard when you're a punk band to do that successfully, but I think they did it. They did it well. And then I'm always kind of revisiting, techno and Detroit techno.
Yes.
Night Drive by Model 500 is always like, I think I post that. My stuff will be like, I keep forgetting that I posted and then reposting, because I love that song. Really transports me. So we have similar music tastes, and we have very different music tastes at the same time, which is great because we have a very interesting record collection because of it.
And I think
Yeah, I kind of want
we
to
like.
virtually dig through your crates. I think it would be just an amazing experience.
No,
holy
there's
cow.
no advertising or anything happening in our collection.
It's what, yeah.
You could literally pull
All right.
DJ sets from like a decade ago out, and they're still intact.
I feel like the band that really kind of was happening at the time when we started Activaire was Gus Gus. Right? There's like a real like departure from, like there was this like new chapter in music and digital culture and architecture, and Gus Gus for me really kind of, and Radiohead, like those two bands really encapsulate that moment in time.
Well, a lot of that stuff is hybrid music, right? Where you're taking a couple of different genres and you're mashing them together. And I think we've always been drawn to that when you take two things that are maybe not necessarily done before, or maybe you think maybe that's not going to sound good, and you end up with something amazing. If anything's doing that, I'm definitely there, interested in listening to it. Punk and funk at the same time, I love that. Electronic musicians making more sort of rock-based music is always there for that. People just kind of blurring the lines always interests me.
How about you, Trevor?
Yeah, Trevor, the heat's on.
Wait, I'm supposed to be asking. For me, if I'm going to zone out, it's, Talking Heads. I'm gonna go to a very mainstream. It's once in a lifetime, and I've loved that song since I was a kid and first heard it, first saw the video. That's how I was introduced to it, was on MTV, and really started getting into the album itself. But once in a lifetime to me has had profound meaning in every aspect of my life. Two kids, jobs, the hustle, a lot of dynamic life changes. So, typically you'll find me, sitting out on the deck with the AirPods in my ear, and it's literally on repeat.
Oh, it's an amazing song.
Yeah.
And the video, that is such a profound moment, because the video and the song were so, they were like underground and mainstream at the same time. It was really this weird and awesome moment.
And the cultural explosion in that video, like what he's doing with the visual effects, but what he's doing and taking these some of the cultural cues from Africa, and he's just creating this kind of visual tapestry, but breaking it down in something that was so relevant. The message of that song I felt was just really relevant then and really relevant today, and I don't think it loses its relevance, because it's about adaptation, it's about change, it's about wonder, it's about worry, it's about anxiety, it's about hope, it is, and it's about going with it. At the end of it, it's all about the turmoil that is life, and do we roll with it? Do we go with it? Or does it overtake us? And so when I want to zone out, that's where I go.
Beautiful.
They're a great band to look at in terms of if you want to get lost in a rabbit hole of kind of talking heads and side projects. And David Byrne on his own is he's done so much stuff. He's got this couple of great records with Brian Eno. The Tom Tom Club are completely different and interesting. You could probably head over to Discogs and look those guys up and find dozens of releases to take a look at. And since we have time, maybe that's a deep listening project we should all do.
What's amazing too is that there's so much cultural and history, and there's so much, there's so many offshoots of everything, music, everything that goes into creating it. But the power, there's an immediacy to music, which is so incredible. When you hear it, you know it, you feel it. You don't have to know the history. You don't have to know the associations. It resonates with you. And then as you start to go with it and you find other people and you start to see the culture that develops around it, it's pure magic. I think it's one of the best things that humans do.
That quote, one of the best things that humans do. I'm glad that this is on a podcast. I think both of you have really just dropped some really profound gems when it comes to music. And here's what I hope people are realizing. Adesh and Laura know what they're talking about, guys. Like, you understand, these are DJs that love music, and not one genre, not two. They love to find music. So I got to ask you another question then. the cheesy one. What's the song that you put on to close your eyes and feel happy? A song, doesn't have to be the number one song, but a song. Close your eyes, feel happy.
My current.
Wait, can I answer this? I want to say, you like to put on the Miles Davis record that makes the kids cry?
I do. That cracks me up.
What?
It's actually what I like to do with the kids is there's a Miles Davis live on the Isle of Wight or Wright, I think he's White, YouTube video. It's like 16 minutes long. It's the height of the Electric Miles era. He's like completely bugged out, and it's like just bonkers. It's like pure jazz fusion. I love this video, and my kids just cannot stand this. It's pretty bonkers. They're like,
beautiful.
"What is this, Daddy? Take it off." I don't know. That does make me crack up.
It is really beautiful. I'm having a moment with the band Japan, and the track. They did so many amazing things. The track "Quiet Life," in terms of like their more pop music, is just so beautiful. It's really fast paced. It's actually 130 BPM, but it's just a super chill track. So that's kind of my current fave.
There's a rabbit hole you can go down. Japan, David Sylvian, all this stuff. For me, I would say there's a couple things that I really like that are recent things. Weekend's "Blinding Lights" is an amazing pop song, and I just watched a couple of bands covered on YouTube, and I just love looking for covers of songs that I like and see how they hold up. And if it's a really good song, no matter how bad the cover or how bad the band, it's still going to sound great and be exciting. And "Blinding Lights," not that the bands I saw were bad, but that song is so amazing the way he did that, and just hearing other people sing it still gets me excited. I also really like Clairo's "Bags." I love that song. It just reminds me of being a teenager, which she's in her 20s now, but it has that kind of newness and sort of awkwardness to it that I really like.
But it's like also like masterfully
yeah, it's
crafted
super
song.
well crafted. She writes some pretty amazing songs. And if you're familiar with her or not, Clairo came to fame because she did a song called "Pretty Girl," where she basically recorded the video using her MacBook, and it's just her singing to her computer. She was like 16 at the time, and it just kind of blew up. But she's a great musician, and if you follow her reference points are amazing. She's really, and I think this is true for all of the musicians I really love, is a lover of music, and she really, digs deep and is finding some really cool things to refer to. And I think that's really what it's about. I was watching what was the Rolling Stones thing we were watching, the documentary. And all those guys are they love music. They love talking about the blues. They love supporting blues musicians. Good music knows good music, and you could follow those paths and find some amazing stuff. I don't know if I answered your question.
You absolutely did. I mean, both of you. I love but that's the power of it, right? This is what we're talking about today. Is music is so it's not flavorless. It's not transient. It shouldn't be temporary. Music is what really gives us relevance to our experience in the moment, right? What ties us to something in the past and what pushes us and drives us toward the future. And if people don't understand how to harness the power of music, aren't they missing one of the most powerful mediums on the planet today, right? And to show us how to use it effectively, how to design with it and build with it. So I'm going to leave the last words up to you. I'm going to close this because I want to give I want to give you guys the last words. I'm not even going to say the thank you. I'm going to say it now. So to Adesh, to Lara, to Activaire, thank you guys so much for being a part of what is probably one of the most fun podcasts we've done, for really letting us into who you are as individuals, why you have a passion, why you love this, and for what Activaire is doing and where it's going, and just everything awesome about curating music, beyond, the temporary, right? So Now I'm going to turn it over to you. And I'm going to do something we typically don't do. I want you to close it out. I want you guys to leave the final thoughts, because I think that's how it's going to resonate. And if you want to mention how anybody can reach you or learn more about Activaire, feel free to do it. But now the microphone is completely at your disposal, Lara and Adesh.
Thank you very much for having us. It's really been a lot of fun. I think, it's funny, we talk about Lara and myself, but there's a whole team at Activaire that does this work with us. And it is like this. This conversation we're having it seems really natural because this is what we do all day long with our team. When we talk about music, this is the fun part of the job. Even when we're talking about our software platform or contracts or finance, it always kind of revolves around this sort of having a good time, getting really into things, being nerdy about things. We just did a project for one of our clients, and it was so much fun to work with our team and have just a really long dialogue about music with everyone and sharing music and really felt like we're in a studio creating a piece of art, and everyone has a unique take on things, and we do a lot of things collaboratively in terms of music, and I think that it's really important to have multiple angles when you look at something. So our team is definitely this conversation. If you want to come over, Trevor, we have this conversation all the time.
Yeah.
And the other thing I want to leave you with is my final thought on curation is one of the most important things about curating is it's really about what you decide not to put in the mix, more so than what you decided to put in the mix. So what you're leaving out is really as important as the things you're putting in. So sometimes, and it's like painting or drawing. You might want to use every color in your palette, but sticking with maybe 2 or 3, you end up with a better product. The same thing goes with music. Not everything goes in, and that's how you end up with something really unique and special. And also leaves room for you to explore, various themes in other projects. So it's just definitely something to think about. Withholding things as well as what you're putting in.
Yeah. I have to think about that. That's interesting. Well, Trevor, thank you so much for having us. It's really been an amazing time talking to you and talking with you, and we have to keep it going. I would say that the difference, to take it back to architecture, the difference between sculpture and architecture is that architecture isn't just pure form. There are sculptural elements of architecture, but there's a program, there's a client on the other side of that. So that's very similar to our approach to music curation for brands. So yes, there's sculptural elements, there's our personal taste, but it's about serving the client. This is a practice. And so what's amazing about our team, we have amazing people on the team, but it's really satisfying to watch our process take off and take root and be developed by the rest of the team. And it's really a team effort. It's kind of like being in a rock band in some ways, because everybody's bringing things together. And I think that combined effort is really, really magical. It's just such an interesting and satisfying project, that we're engaged in every day. So it's a dream come true.